Great. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Ross Yelsey. I work in the Office of Admission and Financial Aid here at Columbia Journalism School. And this is kind of my favorite time of the year, which is still about over 2 months away from when applications are due for people to learn more about our different programs that we offer here so they can understand better about what program might be the right fit for their interests, their goals, and to hear from our faculty and some alumni about, what each program offers. So today we're spotlighting the MS Investigative Specialization, also known as the MS Stabile Investigative Specialization. And I'm really happy to have the director of the program, Professor Sheila Coronel, join us, as well as a faculty member, Ese Olumhense, who's also a graduate of the program, and Oishika Nyoji, who's a graduate of the program from last year, who is now doing a fellowship in investigations at Columbia. So we're going to have hopefully a great conversation to shed some light on what the program experience is like, what you get to do here in the investigative program, and then have some time at the end for some questions from you, which we'll be able to moderate. So thank you again for attending. I see people from all over the US and all over the world who are here today, and we look forward to hopefully giving you a good amount of understanding of why this program is so well known in the industry in terms of investigative training. So I think I'll start with Sheila and Essay, just with a question about what led you both into investigative journalism. Kind of what is your background in the profession, and how did you come to teach here? We'll start with Sheila, I think, on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent many decades as a journalist. I started out as a journalist in the Philippines during the end of the Marcos era. So my first experience of journalism was under a dictatorship. The press was not free. It was very difficult to get information out. And so I really became interested in looking at things that were hidden from the public. And of course, the techniques of investigative reporting are the best techniques for finding out what is secret, what is hidden, what is deliberately kept from the public, especially information about human rights abuses, military excesses, corruption, etc., that people in power are responsible for, but it is very hard to hold them accountable unless you have the information and the evidence to show that they're responsible for wrongdoing. So I set up a nonprofit investigative reporting center in the Philippines, and then went to Columbia in 2006 to set up the Stabile Center for Investigative Journalism, which is a center that trains, hopes to train the next generation of investigative journalists.
Maybe just to step back for a second, what does Stabile mean? People see that name, maybe don't understand what Stabile stands for, what that person is that helped found this particular initiative
Yeah.
at the school.
So Stabile is named after Tony Stabile, who was an investigative journalist back in the 60s. She was a graduate of the Columbia Journalism School, and she was investigating personal care products, shampoo, cosmetics, etc., and looking at the harmful ingredients in those products, for example, hair dye that causes baldness, or face creams that cause skin diseases. And she was holding the cosmetics industry responsible and forcing them to reveal what ingredients they are putting in those cosmetics so that that women who use them would know. So she was doing a lot of these consumer investigations. This was, the 1960s, were an era when there were a lot of consumer investigations. Ralph Nader was looking at cars, automobiles, plane crashes, etc. And Tony Stabile was part of that wave of consumer investigative journalists who were, looking at how big manufacturing, how corporate America was actually selling products that were harmful to consumers. So Tony Stabile, before she died, gave an endowment to Columbia to set up a program that was dedicated to investigative journalism, especially investigative journalism that made an impact, because her own work made an impact. Her expose of cosmetics companies paved the way for FDA regulation that forced these companies to be more transparent, not completely, but more transparent about the ingredients that they put on the products that we buy.
Great, thanks for that background. I actually didn't know all of that myself. And Essay, what led you to want to kind of focus on investigative journalism and now actually teach it here at Columbia?
I think you froze, so I'll take the question. I didn't go to a college with a journalism program. I wasn't ever on my school paper. I got my start in journalism, specifically public interest and investigative reporting, working as an intern at a place called Sahara Reporters. This is a nonprofit that covered sub-Saharan Africa. They wrote about corrupt and shady officials. And in working there and working with the other journalists there, I started to develop this passion or this interest in reporting that improved people's lives. What happens with money that is stolen, or what happens when an official lies about their identity? Grappling with those questions was interesting to me, and it made me look at journalism as not just a collegiate pursuit or something to burnish my resume for future things, but something that could be a career for me. So I say all of that to say I got interested in journalism, came to Columbia specifically for Sheila. I will always say this because she had that international experience. And I wanted to learn from someone who had a broader or a global view of the field. And the rest, as they say, is kind of history. Graduated from the Stabile program, published my master's project, and started working at nonprofit and investigative outlets. And then I ended up working with Sheila, which has been such an honor. Gotten to work with students like Oishika over the past now I think this is the fifth year. So an exciting journey.
Thank you. And Oishika, I guess last year you were a student in the program. A year before that, you were, like a lot of people on this call who are attending, are thinking about applying. So you were thinking about applying 2 years ago. What was kind of your thought process? What were you doing before you came here, and what inspired you to want to, apply to Columbia and specifically to the investigative specialization?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I was also a self-taught journalist back in India. I'm from India. I worked in Delhi. I initially started off covering hate crimes and communal violence with nonprofit organizations in Delhi, and then it kind of rolled into reporting on them, and I realized I liked it. So just started doing that, and one thing led to the other. Started doing this full time and worked with a small investigative unit in Delhi that looked into corruption, especially in the healthcare sector, manufacturing of fake ventilators, for example, and stuff like that. So did all of that for about 3 years, and then decided to actually learn journalism. We always heard from my former boss there that follow the money, but we didn't know how to follow the money. I didn't know that. And the only person similar to what I say said, I knew I wanted to learn from was Professor Cornell. So Stabile was the only thing that I really wanted to do if I wanted to learn journalism. And that's how I kind of applied and had the great fortune of actually coming here and spending 9 months that felt like a year and a blink of an eye at the same time. I did that. And it was just wonderful. And now I get to stay in Colombia for a little bit longer and work in the building. So it's good.
Awesome. So great. So I thought I'd ask Sheila and Essay about investigative journalism itself. Within our MS program, our broader program at Columbia, everyone will get a taste of investigative journalism. There's an investigative techniques class that everybody who graduates will get some training in. But why do you think it's important that we have this specialized master's degree program for people who really want to go deeper into this area? Why does this area of journalism seem to necessitate a bit more of a focused, specialized curriculum like the Stabile one?
So investigative journalism is really about, you can think of investigative journalism as a philosophy. We hold institutions and individuals accountable for what they do. But you can also think of it as a suite of techniques that can be learned, techniques and methods that can be learned. And these would include examining public records, interviewing people, doing field research, forming what we call the empirical spine of an investigation, meaning finding data and documents that provide, that quantify wrongdoing, that show evidence of wrongdoing. So there are specialized skills that cannot be taught in just one investigative techniques class, which all of our students get. There's a 7-week mandatory investigative techniques class for all master students. But what we do is a year-long program to really give students the experience of hands-on learning on those techniques. And not only that, the application of those techniques to an actual investigation. And also to be able to tell a compelling investigative story. So it's a combination of skills, techniques, storytelling, and the mindset that says our role as journalists is to hold the powerful to account.
Ese and Oishika, are there any skills or things that you felt were really valuable now in what you've been doing, or what you know really gained during the time you were at Columbia within the investigative kind of zone of journalism?
Yeah, I think developing those skills, to add just to what Sheila said, having the ability to not only develop your skills in a sense, a theoretical sense, but to apply them to an actual project, I think is really valuable. The traditional path of working at a small organization or a small paper and then kind of graduating to a regional or national outlet that has really been eroded, even in the years since I've graduated from the journalism school. So I think having a space to work on a project, to learn the skills, to apply them to something, and to fail, right? To understand the ups and downs of the process is really valuable and something that is hard to get when you're out in the field working now.
I think just to add to what Ase said, similar to what Professor Coronel mentioned, the empirical spine is something that I really tried to hone into when we got to Stabile. And there's so much documents available, really, and there's so much that you can file for in freedom of information and stuff like that. But what documents do you really incorporate? How do you figure out the data spine of your story? And there's something we used to discuss often in class, that there are stories that there are wrongdoings that is happening, but you can't prove it. Like, how do you prove that? So I think figuring out a way to tell the story that you think is important, but in a way that you can't have a rebuttal for, like that there are data, there's facts, and you just tell the story that way. So yeah.
Great. I see a raised hand right now, but we'll get to some questions a little later in the conversation. So please hold your questions till the question and answer period. Thank you, though. Great. So I'm going to share my screen now. So some key question we get often is like, what does this actually look like when you're actually here? What's the curriculum? What's the structure? How does it actually, work in terms of building these skills we've been talking about? So luckily I have a visualization I hope will help us understand a bit, and maybe we'll just talk through a little bit of that. 1 second here. We'll get the share screen. Great. And so here is the Stabile curriculum, and I thought, Sheila, maybe not going into granular detail about all these classes, could you talk a little bit about how over this 9.5 month period, these 2 semesters, you really are kind of building the skills that any investigative journalist should have to succeed in the field in the time you're here?
Yeah, so let's talk about once you get here. You'll start with your reporting class. This is a reporting boot camp. It's to teach you the essentials of doing good reporting. And a lot of it is going out to the field, interviewing people, finding stories in a beat. This year, I believe what is their beat what was the beat in your year, Oishika? Was it
Labor. This year as well
labor?
as labor.
Yeah. So this the beat is labor. So meaning looking at working conditions, looking at workers, talking to unions, et cetera, et cetera. You pick a particular beat, sub-beat in the bigger labor beat, and you write and find stories. And you go out to the field, every week, file a story. They do both breaking stories as well as longer stories. So that's reporting, and it starts in August. Side by side, as you'll see there, we start with the Stabile Investigative Techniques. So this is the investigative boot camp. So you're doing 2 boot camps together, a reporting boot camp and investigative boot camp, which is where we introduce you to what investigative journalism is, what makes it different from other types of journalism. We introduce you to the investigative process, to developing what we call a document state of mind, how to find documents and data, as Oishika said, to find evidence of wrongdoing. Because investigative reporting is fundamentally the exposure of wrongdoing. So how do you expose and prove wrongdoing? We go in the fall semester to those set of techniques, documents, data, and very important, interviewing. We look at open source intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. The aim of the first semester is to get you started on your master's project and get you ready over the winter break to do a lot of field reporting and to complete your master's project. You'll see that it spans 2 semesters to complete your master's project in the spring. At the same time, in the second half of the fall semester, you'll be doing a writing class. That's the written word. That's your choice. You could do feature writing, business writing, editing, whatever. And what we call an image and sound class. You can do audio, video, or data. Those are both 7-week classes. So then we have what we call a winter break. Really, it's not a break. So be prepared to be working over the winter. We won't make you work over Christmas and New Year, but you'll certainly be doing a lot of your field reporting for your master's project during that winter break. And then we start with the spring. We continue with the investigative seminar where you'll be talking again about your master's project and how the investigative landscape is changing. We'll talk about fact-checking your work, doing a library review. We'll talk about different storytelling techniques. We'll talk about how do you write an investigative narrative. At the same time, you take another investigative class. That's the 15-week seminar and production class. And that investigative class can be anything from conflict reporting to reporting using data to criminal justice reporting. So there you have a selection. You can select from like 5 or 6 different investigative classes where you work in teams to do an investigative report. Then you have what I consider a wild card. You can take any of some like the 25 or 30 different classes we offer at the journalism school. You can learn coding, for example, or you can do book writing. So that whole range, you can do arts and culture reporting, you can do science and environment reporting. So we have you can do audio reporting, you can do video reporting, you can, there's a whole set of many different seminars that you can choose from that look at, for example, subject-specific investigations, as well as develop skills, multimedia skills, audio, video, data, etc.
Great.
And then you graduate in May.
Yeah, so we pack a lot into a very short amount of time. So one academic year, less than a calendar year in terms of time. But yeah, you really do build an amazing amount of skills and get a lot of reporting experience under your belt in less than 12 months. It's kind of remarkable. For essay, I know before this chat began, we were talking about the class section you were teaching the other night. Can you talk a little bit about some of the recent sessions that the Stabile group has been involved with?
Yeah, so this week was a really interesting week. We had our introduction to FOIA this week for the uninitiated. That's the Freedom of Information Act. It's a federal law that kind of governs the ability for any requester, any citizen, or any person, I should say, to request documents from the federal government. And those are really interesting lessons, I find, because again, this is applying the broader idea of public records and public access to these records to the actual project, the master's project. So the assignment for this week is to write a Freedom of Information request. And that's not strictly a federal request. We also talk about the state law and other local laws that govern disclosure, but it's really practical. That's the part I want to stress. We also talked about it because it was a split class, charities, investigating nonprofits. They are a business, just like lots of other businesses, but they operate with some different rules that are worth understanding and provide journalists with some insight into how they work through 990s and other financial documents.
Great. And Oishika, as you look at this curriculum again, looking back on your year last year, were there some highlights, whether it's classes or reporting experiences that you remember from doing all of this just a year ago?
Sure. I mean, this brings back so many memories, but I think reporting is something that we start with, and it's probably, I would say, one of the most important part of the Stabile year, where you're kind of just getting into it. A lot of people have not reported in New York before, have not reported in the country before, like me. So just getting initiated into the landscape, knowing the people and stuff like that. So reporting really gets you started. It also gets your cohort together because you finally start getting to know each other and report together and stuff like that. I think from there, something I did in the November-December time is I took doc. The multimedia subject that I took was doc, and that was brilliant. It was one of the skills that I've always wanted to learn, and it was just a wonderful space to be in. And like Professor Coronel said, I think from December onwards, there's no break per se, because that's almost where you get to what you want to do for your thesis and you start your field work. You take whatever time you get to be on the field, to meet and interview people. So then till from that point till March, when you actually have to submit your thesis, it just goes in your thesis mode with the other classes, and it's quite brilliant.
Great. And I think I had a story too that you had done that was published on our Columbia News Service, which is an outlet that the school offers for students. Publish some selected pieces, when they feel like they are really worth sharing with the wider world. And this is kind of a wire service where other outlets have the opportunity to also publish this. Could you tell us a little bit about this particular story? I think this was probably from reporting, right?
Yes, this was a story that I covered over the Labor Day weekend, right when we started the academic year, and it was based in Jersey. It was about a senior care center that was abruptly shut by the person running it, and I actually did two-part stories, and that the first was just the breaking, kind of like it happened, and meeting the people who were involved, and the second story was about the corruption and the financial fraud that the person who was running the center kind of did. And funnily enough, this story then ended up going to like places like CBS picked it up, which was good. And it kind of got more of an audience. And now a legal proceeding is going on as we talk. It's been exactly a year, a little bit more than a year. And a legal proceeding against the person who ran this center is going on. So that's quite brilliant.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, the great thing is, yeah, all the work you do in classes has that potential to, make a difference, whether it's, in a class project that you publish on our site, but it can also reach people who can really, maybe help make a change in whatever it is you're trying to shed light on. So that's terrific. So I thought I'd stop sharing for a moment and then ask a little bit more about something that Sheila, Ese, and everyone has talked about, which is the master's project. Can you talk a little bit about some subjects and kind of issues that people have delved into in the past when they've been doing master's projects in the Stabile program?
So the master's project is like a capstone project. It's like your thesis, and it's an investigative report. And we say it's 5,000 words, although it can be shorter than that. But an investigative report is really what we hope for is a story that provides new information on a wrongdoing and that holds institutions or individuals accountable for that wrongdoing with solid evidence, either from interviews, documents, or data, with what we call an empirical spine, which is some sense of the scale of the wrongdoing, who's affected, with characters, meaning people who have been either victims of the wrongdoing or somehow involved in the wrongdoing, that will help you tell a narrative, a story of what happened, what the wrongdoing was, who was responsible, how was it done, and what was the harm, what were the consequences, how were people affected. So Ashika, for example, can talk, and Ese can talk about their master's projects to give you more concrete examples of the kinds of wrongdoing they expose. But our students have done criminal justice. They've done housing. Last year, we had 4 students working on New York City housing and housing court, using a variety of methods, including a very ambitious project that got all the housing court records and analyzed them in terms of who were the housing court judges most likely to evict tenants, for example, by just looking at the sheer thousands and thousands of cases that of housing court verdicts. We did a story on public housing as part of that, and we had a Chinese student who looked at the lack of Chinese language interpretation in New York City courts. But we had other students doing immigration. We had a Venezuelan student who did a story on the food served in migrant shelters. About 100,000 new immigrants came to New York in the past year or so. And New York has a right to shelter law, and New York by law has to house all those immigrants. And she looked at the contracts for the food and how the food made people sick. To do that, there was no data, obviously, not obviously, but, no one is keeping track of how many people get sick. So what she did was she went to several housing shelters and did a survey of nearly 100 housing residents to see how the food affected them. So you can also, if there is no empirical spine, you can create your own data. I mean, other stories range from Alzheimer's research to sand mining that was destroying the aquifers on Long Island. We had stories looking at oh, Native American land and how there are far fewer resources for keep preventing forest fires and fighting forest fires in Native American territory, and that entailed traveling to forget where it was, somewhere in the West, to be able to do that story. So the Stabile program has funds to support your travel, your document requests, your data acquisition, and other reasonable expenses, not Broadway shows or anything like that, that are related to your master's project. And you have a master's project advisor. It's one-on-one advising for the master's program. And you work with that project advisor in the course of about 6 months to 6, 7 months to from the very beginning, from conceptualizing your project to reporting it, to overcoming reporting obstacles, if you can get information, to the actual writing and putting together of the project.
Great. Essay and Oishika, can you talk a little bit about your experience doing a project like this and what it was like doing something of this kind of ambition and level of research in, a matter of months as opposed to like several years, which, sometimes investigations will take in the world of journalism. But what's it like getting a lot of this experience under your belt again in a very short amount of time?
Yeah, my master's project was on a program that the New York City Housing Authority, it's a public housing agency, and it's the largest one in North America, not just in the United States, but a program for victims and witnesses of crime. What I was finding was happening was someone would be a victim or a witness to a crime. They were entitled to a transfer based on this program from the agency. Then the agency wouldn't transfer them, or in some cases that I was able to find, they would transfer them to a place that was more dangerous or, oddly more would put them in jeopardy perhaps more than their additional location. So a lot of people were deciding to stay in the places that they lived already. So that story required both public records, it required interviews with actual sources, getting familiar with the agency documents and with their data. And I didn't have any experience doing this before coming to the program. And I worked with an advisor and worked with Sheila basically week by week to chip away at different parts of this. It seems very daunting. I will say you're probably sitting, listening and saying, can I even pull this off? Everyone thinks that. I think that comes into the class and into the program, and yet everyone ends up with a project. So do not fear, support is here.
Yeah, Oishika, do you have anything to add about your experience?
Sure. So I was essentially looking into this one prosecutor based in a small county in New Jersey. And like the empirical spine showed, that he had a track record of trying the most number of juveniles as adults for crimes that generally most counties and states would not try kids as adults for. And the investigation for about 6 months was trying to track down everyone who was involved in the system and what was actually happening and how many kids, what was the scale of this issue. The county was small, so how many people are getting affected by it? And that kind of led me to someone who was tried as an adult by this prosecutor. There were judges who spoke, there were lawyers, defense lawyers who spoke. And yeah, the story of this one guy and what is happening and what is the scale of it. And like Essay said, it does sound very, very daunting and everywhere. But it happens. And I feel like Stabile, even the assignments that we get are structured in a way that makes us think from one step to the other. And that kind of really helps us formulate what the story is and even like if there's a story to begin with.
Mhm. Maybe since we're just talking about what it's like to be going through this process, what is kind of the larger Stabile community like? What's it like to be a member of this kind of larger group as you're working independently on your projects, but also working collaboratively in the Stabile cohort?
The best, the absolute best. The Stabile group I think historically we have always been told, even by our professors, is that it's always a very tight-knit group. And there's a reason for that. We become each other's shoulder, we become each other's professors, and like start solving problems of like how to talk to sources. And like if we have to go do some field work that we're not probably comfortable doing alone, we take a partner. How do you respond or get FOIA responses, and like, how to talk to officials and stuff like that. So because everybody comes from different fields and probably comes from a certain amount of experience, it's always a good group to talk to about the issues and the stories that you're trying to pursue. And apart from that, it's always a very close-knit group. It's always very, very fun. And it starts together, it graduates together, and then I think it stays together as well. I mean, we have stayed together, so it's great.
It's great. I'm seeing the new class that's here. I just started a few, weeks ago for the Stabile Coronel. I see that, already taking place. So that's great. So definitely every year it seems to be, yeah, always a very tight-knit crew in the Stabile group. For Sheila, maybe we could talk a little bit about a key question I'm sure on people's minds about what people might do with this training. What are some of the kind of career paths that Stabile grads have gone on to go on after graduating?
So our graduates have worked for every size of news organization, small nonprofits. Some start off with local newspapers or local investigative nonprofits. Others immediately go into bigger places, like the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, on internships, and eventually get hired. Others go overseas, of course, working for investigative TV programs or doing investigative work for news sites and newspapers. So many don't start off doing investigative reporting, but they certainly use the investigative techniques when they're covering the police or the courts or public health or education. So we have, a graduate from last couple of years doing really good investigative work on education for a nonprofit that is focused on educational issues. So over this long period of time, we have had, the Stabile program has been there since 2006. So we've had about 250, close to 300 graduates, and some of those graduates have won Pulitzer Prizes and other major prizes. Some work for large TV networks, NBC, CBS, ABC. Others work for the New York Times, the Washington Post. I mean, one of our alumni who graduated what year was Grace Ashford. I think she was
17.
2017. She graduated in 2017, became a news assistant for the investigations desk at the New York Times, then went on to the Albany Bureau to cover New York State politics. She was the one who first one to expose George Santos. So, and George Santos was this New York State legislator who was found to have fabricated everything about his life. And she did, the things we learned in the Stabile program is to look at public records, compare what people claim against what the documents say, and so on. So they've done a lot of impactful work. A number of them work for business outlets, the Wall Street Journal, Business Insider, because business is a rich hunting ground for investigative stories. Others work out of DC and do more political reporting. We have, I don't know, maybe 5 alumni in Hong Kong working under really challenging circumstances and still attempting to do, high impact reporting, despite the constraints in places like those. Yeah. So they're really everywhere, and Stabile is a community. I often go to international conferences. Ese was in, the Investigative Reporters and Editors Conference this year, and we organize these drinks or meetups with alumni, and alumni from different years are very helpful to each other in getting contacts, getting information, or just, places to think about the future of investigative reporting and to think about, where careers can go, think about the direction of their careers. Yeah.
Why would you say this training? I those people know this program. It's been around, as you said, since 2006. But Stabile grads tend to, wind up at some really amazing places, whether there are big outlets or smaller ones doing, amazing work. But what do you think is about this skill set, this training that you're building here, that's been so valuable in people's careers as they've kind of progressed through them?
I think right now, you could get news everywhere, right? Breaking news that's everywhere. But what investigative reporting gives you is this program gives you is a particular set of skills that allows you to go beyond what's breaking, to dig deep into events. And there's a premium now because a lot of news organizations now say, that commodity news, that's breaking. People can get that from Twitter, from TV, from everywhere. But this high value reporting is really requires you to dig deeper, to go beyond the story, but to find new evidence, new stories, new angles with which to report. So the skills, no matter what you're doing, if you're doing long form narrative journalism or explanatory journalism or podcasting, a number of our students have ended up doing podcasts, the skills of finding evidence, verifying information, getting documents and data, they're portable across a broad range of platforms and genres of journalism.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I say, on top of your teaching, which you're doing, can you tell us about some of the work you do as a reporter these days as well?
Yeah, well, I've been doing a lot of I come from the Philippines and I've done a little bit of reporting on that. Right now I'm working on like a book project that looks back at the era of dictatorship. I work with students sometimes, our reporting on the Philippine drug war. We work with 2 students for a year, just getting as much data as we can, and then working with a computer scientist and a statistician to project how many people were actually killed using a subset of data. It was like computer modeling. So we try and work on this new ways of using data and computation for human rights investigations. So that's what I did a few years ago with a couple of our graduates. Yeah.
And Essay, what about yourself? What kind of work are you doing when you're not obviously teaching the Stabile group?
Yeah, I'm also reporting, doing investigative reporting. I work at a place now that's called Cal Matters. I used to work at the Markup, and as is kind of customary in journalism now, we were acquired by a larger nonprofit. But a lot of the reporting I do now, and I think this is something that I've picked up in Stabile, focuses on ways that we can use data or documents, things the government generates to tell really creative stories. I think one thing you learn as an investigative reporter is you hit walls very frequently. And the artful pivot, the skillful pivot takes some creative and resourceful thinking. So right now I'm working on a project about policing that looks at how all of the devices that police officers use, like body cameras or tasers or other devices, what information do they generate and how can we use that to tell compelling audio stories or compelling print stories or digital things?
I'm going to share my screen one more time here and just share a couple more things I just wanted to highlight since I wanted to give a few visuals to people too. So this is, and maybe Sheila and Ese can talk about this as well. This is Pulitzer Prize finalists from this last cycle, 2024. So in local reporting, 2 of our recent graduates were part of this team that was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prizes. Alyssa Daly, who's the class of 2022, and Nate Rosenfield, who's class of 2023, both from Stabile. We're part of this team at the New York Times and Mississippi Today that was looking at corruption and abuse in the sheriff department in Mississippi. But that kind of goes to show a bit of how people are, able to do that kind of caliber work right away coming out of the school. That's definitely a possibility. And I think, Sheila, if I'm not misunderstanding, I think there is a connection now. There's a Mississippi kind of fellowship or placement where people can work down there. And potentially after they graduate and do investigative work in that state. Is that right?
So we during the pandemic, when times were really tough, we started working with the Institute for Nonprofit News to fund internships in nonprofit investigative reporting centers for graduates of the school. And one of those that initially we funded was the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting that works with Mississippi Today. And that was how Elisa Daly got a placement in Mississippi. It was competitive, of course. She was interviewed and all of that. But she got to work there. We were only paying for 3 months, but she was such a dogged reporter that the Mississippi Center decided to extend her for another year to work on this really groundbreaking story about what they call the Goon Squad, this squad of sheriffs that were very abusive with ordinary citizens, the people they jailed, et cetera, et cetera. So the first story came out in the New York Times, and then the following year, Nate Rosenfield also went to Mississippi Today, and this year we have another graduate, Mukta Joshi, who's also working with Mississippi Today. Basically, Mississippi Today decided to continue funding that program. I think we contribute a little bit, but it was seeded initially with a contribution from the journalism school. And I think that opportunity is still available to students to work as summer interns for nonprofit investigative reporting centers all around the US.
Very cool. And I was just going to notice in the news this week, there's a new book out by one of our grads as well, Tusa Raksa Abramian, which has been in the New York Times and all these places this week. So a lot of our grads, as Sheila mentioned, have been publishing books too. So this is just one that happens to be kind of getting some buzz. I think it was published this week by Random House. So an example of that as well. But I thought I'd move on to Oishika again. And another thing we haven't talked about much yet is the Columbia Journalism Investigations, which is a in-house investigative group where we have recent grads from our different programs working as fellows for a year. And Oishika, you're a member of that team this year. Can you talk a little bit about, what led you to apply to this and what you've been working on, as much as you can say at this point?
Sure. So the team that I'm working in, the CGI has essentially three beats. So two fellows in each team. The one that I'm a part of is a criminal justice beat. And we essentially look into the good old prosecutors and how they kind of try cases and DA's offices across New York and also Ohio. This year, what led me to apply here is that I was doing a criminal justice story while for my thesis project. And CGI is one of those rare opportunities where you get time to really, really hone into your investigative skills. More often than not, in newsrooms, you just keep going in stories, right? Like one byline after the other. Here, you have time to really go into one thing that you want to look at and produce something that hopefully makes an impact. CGI stories in the past have been published in NPR, in Reuters, in Guardian, in ProPublica, so in a variety of wonderful places. And that's what I'm doing now. There are also fellows who are working in cross-border investigations and migration projects. So it is a small team, but a mighty team.
Right. I think if I'm not mistaken, you're working with at least one other Stabile grad from last year too, Curtis, on a team. So you're continuing that connection with your classmates too.
Yes, it's the best. We are two fellows in the criminal justice beat, and we are both Stabiles. And we both happen to do our thesis also in very similar beats. So it's wonderful to be working with him.
That's great. And so just a couple more questions before we open this up. I think for Sheila, since we talked a little earlier that in the broader MS program, there is, of course, investigative skills you'll gain, not at the same kind of depth you would in this program. But how might someone who's watching this session now or who might watch the recording later and is thinking this over, think about whether this is the right fit? Like, what should you think about whether, like, if you're interested in investigations a bit, how deeply should you be committed to that kind of type of journalism to want to apply specifically to this Stabile specialization?
Right. So as I said, the investigative techniques are portable through different journalism formats and genres, but investigative journalism is a very specialized field. It is really exposing wrongdoing, how it happens, who's responsible, what are the consequences. And that requires patience, certain personality type. If you want to do quick breaking stories, then maybe the Stabile program is not for you. If you want to do long form narratives about, the inner lives of people, maybe the Stabile program is not good for you. But if you want to do deep reporting, and if you have the patience to wait for months for people to talk to you, to get your FOIA request back and do, and pour, long hours looking at documents or data in order to find evidence of wrongdoing committed by an individual or institution, then maybe the Stabile program is for you. So it really depends on what kind of journalism you want to do. Certainly, we've found if you want to do more feature journalism or personal personal essays or opinion writing, certainly Stabile, the techniques you will learn in the school are helpful, but maybe the Stabile program is not for you because you have far less flexibility in the curriculum because a great part of the curriculum is focused on doing investigations. If you just want to learn some of those techniques, then the general MS program is probably best for you. If you want to learn many different things, audio, video, data, then maybe, maybe you don't take the specialization because the regular MS program gives you far more flexibility in doing, if you have many different interests, to explore those different interests.
Yeah, Ese and Oishika, anything else you'd like to add about maybe what kind of mindset will be helpful in the Stabile program in terms of what can really help you succeed in a very demanding program? As we've outlined, it's pretty short, but you can accomplish a great amount of things here. But is there anything people should kind of think ahead about like ways to approach this program to make the most out of it?
Yeah, I'll add to patience, a willingness and an ability to collaborate with others, and persistence are really important skills. I also think, and it sounds very romantic, but having the audacity to want to change the world, to not only recognize problems in the world, but to think about the mechanisms that permit these things to happen and how they can be changed. I think that is a really valuable skill or a mindset to have because it will propel you through those moments that are slow and tedious and boring and not fun at all. And that's a lot of the work, but having this kind of internal propeller pushing you toward not just agitating for the truth, but kind of unspooling all of the factors that lead us to whatever wrongdoing we're looking at is really important.
Yeah, Oishika, anything you'd like to add?
Yes, like I think like Professor Cornell and as I mentioned, patience, like how that that's one thing that you have to have. Just adding on to what I said with audacity, I think just being okay with getting it wrong sometimes, because you do get it wrong sometimes. Sometimes we talk about hypothesis and your hypothesis is wrong, and like you assume the story is something else, and the data tells you or evidence tells you that it's something else. So just being okay with getting it wrong and then getting back up and finding what the actual story is. And it sounds a little cheesy, but to just want to get the story, to like want to keep at it, being a little bit inquisitive about this doesn't seem right. So let me just look into it, even if it's not possible. It takes you a long way.
Great. This is all great advice. And now we have about 10 minutes for some questions. So in terms of how this will work, please put I know I see a raised hand, but we're not going to do the audio questions. So please write in your questions in the chat, direct them to me, Ross, the host, and then I'll be able to ask those of our group. And just to note, we're not going to talk about some of the more nuts and bolts stuff about admissions today. So I'll put a link here too for those questions if they're about educational financing or about more specific application questions. We're happy to chat in another session or on one-on-one chat about those, but anything more that can be kind of illuminated in terms of the program itself and kind of the student experience in Stabile, please put those in the chat and we'll see what we can answer in the next few minutes. Great. I see one about the master's project. Do you need to know kind of what you're going to do when you get here? Like, should people be concerned about like already having a fully baked idea for an investigation by the time they arrive at school, or should they kind of keep an open mind in terms of what they might approach as a topic?
I think you should keep an open mind because don't be wedded to your idea. You'll learn more about investigative reporting and what it takes, and your initial idea may not even be investigative or it may not be feasible. So I think a lot of people come with some initial ideas about what the project is going to be, but in the end, a lot of them change it also. Some people really know from the very beginning what they're going to do, but others shop around and look for the best opportunity. And we also have collaborations, like with Columbia Journalism Investigations, with last year we had the Housing Project. This year we're working with Consumer Reports also. So I think if there are also opportunities for you to do more collaborative or teamwork. So it's good to have ideas. It's always good to have ideas. And generating story ideas is a particular skill and muscle that you should develop, but also keep an open mind.
Mhm. We had a couple questions about what people should kind of have as a background to maybe be a good applicant to the Stabile program. If someone's just finishing their undergrad, maybe they've, been involved in journalism, or even if not, would they be able to still apply to the Stabile program, or should they already have experience doing like investigations to be admissible to this program?
No, you don't need to have experience in either investigations or in reporting to apply to the program. I mean, last year we had one who's a research scientist. He was doing lab experiments on Alzheimer's. Of course, maybe that's investigative as well. But certainly he had no journalism experience. And this year we have, a champion figure skater who's hasn't had journalism experience, and she was accepted to the program. I think it's really more of a personality type, a certain tenacity and a certain willingness to go out there and get to the bottom of things. That's what we're looking for. You don't need to have investigative experience. It helps whether you've done reporting. Some journalism experience helps, but it's not necessary. I think what's more important is a sense, a nose for wrongdoing, and the ability to follow that scent of wrongdoing to wherever it takes you. That's what we're looking for. And it takes patience, as I said, and it takes doggedness and persistence. I think those are the personality types we're looking for. If you have a short attention span, no, investigative reporting is not for you, definitely. Yeah.
And Essay, earlier we were talking about the fact you were talking about FOIA requests the other day, and so that's a U.S. kind of system of recruiting information. People from other countries are wondering, if you're coming into this program and you're not acquainted with like the U.S. legal system, U.S. kind of bureaucracies and things like that, will this program still give you that training to help you understand how to navigate some of the, assignments you might have while you're here?
Yes, definitely. I mean, in fact, now we have a pretty diverse student group. Folks come from all over the world. I think that's one of the exciting things about the Stabile program is everyone is coming from a different place, both in terms of experience, but also like where you are from in the world. And also we're teaching really the mechanics of FOIA or of public records law. So it's just about developing the understanding of what we typically can access and how to go about accessing it. We can teach you how to find out if the country that you're interested in reporting on or the place outside the US you're interested in reporting on has specific laws or policies or statutes that govern the disclosure of information. But really you're learning the mechanics, you're learning the thought process behind getting that stuff.
We have a question here about OSINT reporting, which I think is open source intelligence. What kind of training is available in that realm of doing journalism in this program?
So we have one class in OSINT in the Stabile class, but if you wanted to do more open source investigations, then you have to take the conflict reporting class that's taught by Azmat Khan, which is really a deep dive into OSINT. We have kind of an introductory class in OSINT in the fall semester, but we can't possibly teach everything, and really learning OSINT requires a full semester, maybe more. So you can take that class if that's the direction we want to go.
Mhm. And we had a question from somebody wondering if they decide to apply right now to the MS, the broader program, admitted to that program and come here, could they switch later if they're, feeling once they get here they want to do more investigative work into the Stabile program? I believe the answer to that is no, but I think maybe
No.
she can explain why it's hard to do that once you've really, already begun the curriculum.
No, it's very hard to switch in the middle because we start the Stabile program from the first week, after Labor Day, in the first week of classes. So it's very hard if you switch in the middle of that because we work together from day one to explain to you what investigative reporting is and get you started on your master's project. So if you miss that first half, you're going to miss a lot. So you can't really switch, but you can switch out of the Stabile program into another program. I remember I had a very good student who was like close to tears when she came to me and she said, I really love investigative work, but what I really want to do is to be an audio reporter. And there's nothing wrong with that. She's now working for public radio somewhere in the East Coast, and she's very happy. But investigative is not what she wanted to do. She wanted to do long form audio stories, and that's fine.
Mhm. Yeah, and for people who are still thinking this over, the great news, as I kind of said at the beginning of the session, is there's still about 2 months before you need to actually submit your application. So please check in with our team if you're really deciding between a specialized program or our broader MS or a different program, so you can really feel confident that the program you're applying for would be probably the right fit for you if you were to come here. So we can continue that conversation over the next few weeks as well. Another question we get pretty often, Sheila, is about people interested in maybe in investigative work, but also data kind of related work. And of course, we have another program we'll actually talk about in a webinar tomorrow, the MS in Data Journalism program, which also obviously focuses on data skills specifically. But if you're interested in kind of both things, how might you start to kind of figure out whether the Stabile program, which really focuses on investigative program skills specifically, or more on the data side and the data program, whether which one might be the better fit for you if you're interested in kind of both realms of the profession?
Well, first of all, if you're really interested in looking at both, you should do reporting on it. So
Mhm.
I would suggest that you attend the webinar on the data journalism program, but also talk to graduates of that program and to professors of that program to see what they learn and figure out yourself what's the best fit for you. I cannot tell you what it is because it depends on what balance of investigative and data you want. If you want more investigative, then definitely Stabile program is for you. If you want more data, data is a 3-semester class. If you want real immersion in data and you want to work as a data journalist, then the data program is for you. You get data skills in the Stabile program. You can take a data class and a computational class while you're in the Stabile program, but the focus is really on the techniques for uncovering and finding evidence of wrongdoing. In the data program, the focus is really on data and computation.
I think one last question is about kind of collaboration again. I think a lot of people do their master's project kind of on their own. They have a project, but sometimes people work together in some cases. Can you talk about some of the opportunities to collaborate with other classmates on different investigative projects?
So there are opportunities to work as a team, but you each have to produce your own master's project, even if you work together. So for example, we had a team of 4 students last year looking into New York City housing. And then we see the Columbia Journalism Investigations has opened up, maybe 2 current students to work with them on their investigations on prosecutorial misconduct. And so, but they work with the team, Oishika, two other Stabile students, with Christine, who's the director of the program, and then 2 more. So it would be a team of 5, but they're all collaborating on building a database, but each working on their own stories. So there's really ample opportunities to collaborate. I don't know what team project we will have next year, but each year we try to have a place for people who want to work together in producing each one their own master's project, but working together on a particular subject matter area. Then there's that opportunity as well. But also in the other investigative classes, and in fact, the other classes you take in the spring, a lot of it will be working in teams too. So you will have, if not in the investigative program, you'll have ample opportunity to work in a team in your other classes. I mean, journalism is rarely now solo undertaking. It's a team sport increasingly, and being collegial and collaborative, believe me, it's whenever people, whenever editors call me to ask about a graduate, they call me for a reference, and they always ask me, can this person work well in a team? And are they easy to work with? So a lot of newsrooms have excuse the language, no asshole rule. And so if you're an asshole, you will not last very long in investigative reporting. Yeah.
I like that. We might not use it for our brochure, but I think that's a very thing to
Yeah.
think about collaborating and working, in a team here at the school and in your career going forward. So that's really helpful to know. So great. I saw a couple questions more about the data journalism webinar tomorrow. So I put the link back in the chat. That's our Meet With Us page. You can find that registration link under online events. So please register there for that. And we also having a ton of other sessions about other programs. And also, again, as I mentioned, nuts and bolts things that we probably won't be able to answer here about educational financing opportunities, the application process, the different requirements for the application. We'll get into all that nitty-gritty in those sessions in the coming days. So please sign up through that link for any of those upcoming sessions. We hope to see you there. I'd like to thank Professor Coronel, Ese, and Ishika for joining us today. It's been really insightful. I think we had a lot I learned from this session. I hope a lot of people who tuned in did too, and it's great to see so many people sign in from again, all over the world to learn more about this amazing program. We hope to continue this conversation again through the next few weeks and up through, of course, application period and then and beyond as well. So continue to keep in touch and thank you for your time. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.